Hello there. Hi, Mariana. Hi, Deniz. How are you doing?
Hi,
Hi.
Marcus. Hey,
Good to see
great
you
to see you.
again. So today Dezeen has teamed up with the Istanbul Design Biennale to talk about your plans for this year's edition. And in fact, I just got the press release about an hour ago about your new dates and everything. So I guess the great news is you're planning to go ahead with the Biennale. And I'm sure we'll hear a little bit more about that in a minute or two. Just to introduce you both, we have Deniz Ova, who's the director of the Istanbul Design Biennale. Hi, Deniz.
Hi, Marcus.
And I guess you're in Istanbul, right?
Yes, I'm in Istanbul in flesh and blood.
And we also have Mariana Pestana, who's the curator of this year's Biennale. Hi, Mariana.
Hi, Marcus.
And
Nice.
I guess you're in Porto, right, where you live?
Yeah, that's right.
And I remember when I last saw you, it was in the street in Porto. I was there to give a talk at the Porto Biennial. And I saw you in my hotel having a drink one evening, and the next day or even later the same night, I just passed you in the street. But we never got to hang out. I'm sorry about that. It was all a bit hectic.
Yeah, that's true. We were, this was at the gallery cafe, right? I think I went there by chance and bumped into you. It was a shame because I was just on my way to a birthday, I guess, and but plenty more opportunities, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'd just given a talk and then I was off to meet some friends. And Deniz, when was the last time I saw you?
I guess 2 years ago during the last Istanbul Design Biennial, you visited us. Then by that time, traveling was possible.
I know, I remember that extremely well because we hosted a fantastic dinner at Soho House in Istanbul. I gave a little talk with Jan Bolen, who was the curator 2 years ago. And then we had the idea with Soho House to invite all the leading creatives from Istanbul and beyond, like friends from Georgia and places like that. And it was such a great occasion. So I'm really, really hoping that I can come back this year, although I understand things are a little bit more difficult.
Yeah, we do also really hope that this will be possible and that we all can see each other again. I mean, it hasn't been such a long time actually, but it feels like ages.
I know, and I was just doing a talk with Moy earlier, and we were saying about how we're all beginning to miss now all of our friends around the world. But luckily for me, I'm able to do these live conversations with really interesting people. So in some way, it's kind of replaced meeting you all in the real world. It's not quite as good though, but it's great to see you all. Tell us a little bit about, I know you have a presentation about the Biennale, but tell us a little bit about your plans for this year and most importantly, the new dates that you've just announced.
Yeah, just very shortly, as you said, we announced today that we're continuing to do the biennial this year, and we're very happy that we are able to do it in one way or the other. So we don't know what the next days will bring, but we're planning and committed to do it in autumn. If people remember, we slightly changed the dates. We are starting on the 15th of October in 2020 and planning to go on for as long as we need to, let's say. So there are some projects, and Mariana will explain that later, that will continue until mid-2021. So I think we just gave us a little bit more time than usual and expanded our notion about time also because these are extraordinary days and we need to rethink what we're doing.
Okay, so maybe this is a good time for you to give us the presentation. I think you're going to start then, Deniz, and then Mariana's going to talk a bit more detail about it.
Yeah.
So I'll start. Oh no, you start, and then I'll share my screen after. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. You go ahead.
I'm not going to show anything, but there are some, I think, important things that we should share before we start. And first of all, thank you very much for sharing the floor with us, even if it's a digital floor. It's always a great opportunity to speak to you. And also, we followed the programs of the Virtual Design Festival with great excitement. And I think that's an amazing moment, or you just gave another possibility, another layer to what we are all doing. So thank you for that again. And I start actually with the short history of the Istanbul Design Biennial. And I want to tell you a little bit about the institution that the biennial is actually organizing, because that makes a difference in the experience that the biennial is actually offering or offered in the last 4 editions. So the Design Biennial is realized by a non-profit, non-governmental organization. It's called the Istanbul Foundation for Culture and Arts. And the foundation is one of the major cultural institutions in Istanbul and has been operating here since 1973. So it initially started as a single Istanbul festival and then became 4 different festivals and 2 biennials actually over the last 47 years. So we're running film, music, jazz, and the theater festival every year. In addition to these, the Istanbul Biennial and the Istanbul Design Biennial. And maybe also important to say, besides this, we're coordinating the Pavilion of Turkey at La Biennale di Venezia. And this year was actually the year for architecture, which unfortunately had to be postponed or cleverly postponed to 2021. So the Istanbul Design Biennial is the youngest event of the institution. It just started in 2012 and has been curated by, I think, some of the most exciting thinkers, curators, and designers of our time. Actually, starting with Joseph Brima, together with Emre Arulat, continuing with Zoe Ryan, Beatrice Colomina, Mark Wigley, and last year working with Jan Bolen and many other collaborators. And last year, we were so fortunate to get the possibility to start working or start a new adventure actually with Mariana Pestana, and we're super happy that she's with us in this extraordinary times, being very flexible and generous in rethinking the biennial over and over. And this year she's collaborating with Sumitra Upam and Billy Muraban, and Mariana will tell a little bit more about them and what they're actually doing with us. But maybe also important to say from the very beginning, the Design Biennial promised to be an experimental platform, and it does continue to do so, and presenting more design ideas and practices, and especially things that are unusual topics or not directly identified as design for our audiences. We're very lucky, and we have a very special dialogue with our audience, which is almost 90% non-design professionals, which completely changes the game how you talk about design. That makes the whole difference, maybe rethinking what is design, for who do we design, what's the impact of design, and sometimes we have to put the ball on the floor and be a little bit more realistic. So far, unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know, every single edition of the Istanbul Design Biennial coincided with interesting moments in time that somehow emphasize actually the urgency of the respective themes that we were presenting in a natural way. Sometimes it was really harsh and heartbreaking what we had to live through, and obviously this year is extraordinary and is an interruption in time for all of us. Nevertheless, we truly, truly believe that design has always been helpful to mediate and understand daily life. And understand it in a different way, read it in a different way. So emphasizing the need of rethinking actually how we're living in order to create empathy with other communities, with the environment, with the cosmos, and many more things. And before empathy is Mariana's theme that she will be explaining in a minute, but before I give her the floor, there are 2 more things that I would like to add. Emphasizing the importance of being able to continue, and that we cannot do alone. We do it with a lot of people, we do it with all the culture scene together. We don't know what lies ahead of us, so all the cultural institutions around the world are struggling. They're trying to survive the pandemic, and all the actors are trying to, or all the industry members are trying to amplify the importance of what we're doing. And not only for us and the professionals, the importance for society and community, and I think we should not forget about that. In this moment, I think it's a big experiment for all of us, how we will be engaging with our audiences in the future, or right now, actually, but truly believing that it's necessary, and arts and culture will help us to create resilience for all of us in the future. This year, again, thank you very much for the opportunity of participating, being actually a viewer, an audience to the Design Festival, Virtual Design Festival, which gave a whole other notion and explained us that other things are possible, and very generously collaborating also with us. Thank you again, Marcus. And a last big thank you actually to all the supporters that are supporting cultural institutions, cultural activities. Without them, it's impossible. In our case, the Design Biennale's case is a special thanks to Vitra Turkey, our sponsor from day one. They have always been supporting us, not only as a sponsor, but also as friends, colleagues, motivating, helping us, explaining the many different layers of design actually in the most complicated ways and in the most simple ways. So very long introduction, but I felt we should share that. Maybe we can discuss some points later on again. I'll leave the floor to you, Mariana. Thanks.
Thank you, Denise, for such a warm welcome from your side as well. I'll share my screen now with the presentation. So yeah, start with a big thank you to our sponsors. And here's the title of our biennial. It's been a real adventure, of course, to be working on a biennial in the current circumstances, and to transform it and to bring it to what it is now. So I think I was very, very lucky to be working with a fantastic team at IKCV. So I'd like to begin just by thanking Deniz, but also Gülüm and Mert and Pelin and Can and the communications team, as well as my own curatorial team, who are really spectacular duo, Sumitra Uppam and Billy Muraben, who have together with me worked so hard to reshape this biennial. And I'd also like to thank our young curators group. So this is a new curatorial group that we set up in Istanbul. It's a group of Istanbul-based curators, and they are Nur Horsalana, Ulia Soleil, and Eylül Şensöz, and they are working with us also for the program of the biennial. Also, this backdrop that you see was created by Maria João Macedo, who is our graphic designer, and I'm super happy with her beautiful identity that she created for us. And finally, I also want to thank Future Anecdotes Istanbul, who have been our partners in crime from the beginning. They are our exhibition designers. And of course, to thank you, Marcus, for hosting us today. So the title of the biennial is Empathy Revisited, Designs for More Than One. And this is the title because today we tend to think of empathy or understand empathy as a way of connecting to other people. But empathy's original meaning had to do with the transference of feelings towards objects and the natural world. And so this edition of the biennial takes empathy back to its roots to explore how design can help us or give us tools to fill into territories and landscapes and microorganisms, other species, but of course also to one another. In light of these, the current events, the pandemic, we have reappraised the biennial model because we were interested in foregrounding practices of care, localism, and also new models for coexistence across these human and non-human entities that I spoke about. And so the program, I'll show you now, I'll take you through the program, and it will be divided into 4 main parts. One is a critical cooking show, which is a digital series. The other is a series of research projects that we're launching in October, and which will be archived in what we titled A Library of Land and Sea. And finally, a series of interventions in the city of Istanbul, but also at Pera Museum, that are called New Civic Rituals. And then there's a program, a film-based program that we're making that is called Empathy Sessions. And I'll show you mostly work in progress, Marcus. So not final projects, but very much what is being produced right now in studios, in the studios of our participants. And we are super grateful because we have an extraordinary list of participants confirmed already, which we launched this morning. There's a few final names and details about the venues, etc., that we're still confirming, but we'll have a final list very soon. And so the Critical Cooking Show is a series of episodes that will be broadcasted weekly, and they are each hosted by a different practitioner or thinker. And what these episodes do is that they explore how food exchange, food preparation, food consumption relates to urgent ecological, geopolitical, economic events and conditions. And so the series is complex, it's multi-scalar, and you can expect to see episodes about the microbial transformation of foods, to landscapes that have been shaped by agricultural production, episodes about specific foods and behaviors that they set forward, about gestures. And so I'll take you through a couple of them. One example is a film by Ilana Harris Babu, who works with music videos and cooking shows to critique even and explore this idea of the American dream. And this is a fictional film where Ilana will play the role of a woman who has fled Brooklyn in New York to the countryside during the COVID-19 pandemic. And she's writing letters back home about the challenges that she's facing. And she's trying to grow a garden in her backyard. She's trying to grow scallions in a cup in her windowsill, to make sourdough, to make kimchi. You know how the story goes, right? So this is a commentary on how the world and kitchens responded to COVID-19. But another example of a more documentary genre is, for example, by Linda Schilling, who is an architect and urban designer from Chile. And she's doing a show about avocados, these very contested foods. And she will begin with this seemingly delicious and innocent toast of avocado to then take us to the radical transformation of landscapes in Chile, and also the lack of regulation around agricultural practices by the state over there, and then the neoliberal extractivism that goes along with the practice of planting and eating avocado and how it's affected the Petorca River, for example. So this is our cooking show. Then we have another line of program that is a library of land and sea. And this will be an archive of research projects. And these projects will begin in October this year. They are led by designers and thinkers who are actively investigating in the Mediterranean basin region. So the practices that we've invited to take part in this project, they all use design in a very imaginative way, and to rethink territories through our relationship to land and to sea. And in doing so, they reveal aspects of food production that are not normally visible to the naked eye. And so what we'll do is we'll provide support to grow these research initiatives. Many of them are ongoing, and then present them in a display in Istanbul at Art Culture. So one example here is by Counterspace, who are a Johannesburg-based architectural studio led by Simaya Valley, Amina Kashkar, and Sala de Villiers. And their research looks at food and specific foods almost as species. And they're looking specifically at the regions of Morocco and Egypt. And so, for example, here is cumin as one of these ingredients that is taken in their project almost as a species in its own right. And they investigate through their project each of these foods at a number of scales. So here already you can see in this image the microbial scale, the almost microbial scale, the scale of the nation, but also the scale of the continent and the sub-Saharan region. And so it's an analysis sort of across scales. Other projects, another example is by Tiri Lab, who are an architectural initiative that explore multicultural heritage in relation to gastronomy, but also technology in the rural communities of the Epirus region in Greece. And Tiri Lab are exploring the kitchen as a space of assembly, but also as a space of empowerment and resistance. And so they're mapping out and documenting satellite kitchens with more than 40 communities in the Thesprotia hinterland in Greece. And so they're looking at interior spatial configurations and analyzing them. And also with some of these projects, they are then creating what we call legacy outcomes, or they are making small scale interventions in these territories that they are working with. Then we are also doing a series of interventions in the city of Istanbul, and also in some spaces like the Para Museum, as I mentioned. And these are interventions that rehearse new forms of encounter. They are hosted by specific groups in Istanbul, specific communities and sites. And so you can expect to see, as part of this program, things like communal cooking facilities, playgrounds, new kinds of gardens in the city, and they generate encounters between different scales and different bodies, so that those can be birds and humans, but also stars and plants and microbes. And one important part of this program is that it's developed in collaboration with a young curators group that I mentioned that at the beginning of the presentation. And this group is establishing connections with the context of the city of Istanbul, but then also bringing these interventions to life through a series of talks, events, meals that they are curating. So I'll show you just a couple of images. So for example, this is a mock-up, a prototype that's being developed now in the studio of Sofia Magalhães, who is a ceramicist and is working with Scray, an architectural studio, and also Francisca Sotomayor, who's a graphic designer. And together they're building a series of germinators, seed germinators to be installed. They're developing this in collaboration with a group in Istanbul, permaculture group. And here you can see that they're testing the irrigation system of this germinator in ceramic. Another example is by Orkan Telhan with Eli. So Orkan is a designer and researcher and artist. Eli are an architectural studio, and together they are doing these microbial fruits of Istanbul. So we will be gathering soil from different gardens in Istanbul, and gardens, especially the urban gardens, the bostans or perishable food gardens in Istanbul are so important historically. But we're collecting soil from different gardens in the city and then bringing them all together to this garden of gardens, and then and into one installation, and then they will design these microbial fruits, so popsicles made of fermented ingredients taken from those soils, that will allow the audience to experience and learn about the heritage of these gardens. Often these popsicles are very spicy, so they change your bodily perception, which is a very interesting exercise in perception and empathy as well. And then finally, there's this model by, in the image you see a model of a project that we're developing with Studio Ossidiana, who are an architecture, design and research studio led by Alessandra Covini and Giovanni Bellotti. And they are doing this installation in Istanbul that's called Buyukada Songlines. And it's a place for encounters between different species, so birds, plants, seeds, and people. and it will travel from the Princess Islands and then dock at the Golden Horn as a floating pavilion to be visited. And Obsidiana have collaborated with ASIC Radio in Istanbul and many others to make a series of interviews and research about the very specific context that is the Princess Islands in terms of all of the discussions and this changing landscape. On the one hand, there's the Mediterranean microclimate, but there's also an evolving migration pattern for birds. There is the depletion of fisheries, transplantation of corals. There is a big discussion about horse carriages in the island. So anyway, this project will bring this whole discussion to life. And here you can see one of their beautiful models. So they've taken it out to the canals to photograph for our presentation today. And then finally, we have these, the empathy sessions, which is, as I mentioned, a film-based program. So I'll show you, the idea here is that this is a reflective program that allows us to expand our notion of empathy. So I'll show you just a couple of examples. One, this image is by Callum Bowden as part of his Mephisto and the Extremophile VR journey, which is a journey to the edge of scientific knowledge. It's a journey into the deep life inside of the earth, where we will meet bacteria and shift perspectives from the human to the geological and machinic to understand about these extremophiles, which are creatures that live without light, without sunlight. And the other example I've gathered here is by Java El Hash, who is a multidisciplinary artist who works a lot with virtual reality as well, but also holography and painting. And she is creating a virtual hammam. So in this moment when we all wish we could be, you know, you could visit the wonderful hammams, you know, for example, in Istanbul, yeah, Java is creating this experience. It's very interesting because when you visit it, you're the only human inside. So for her, that's really important as a means to make you reflect about all of the other entities that might populate this space that are other than human. But also for her, VR is not about escapism. It's really about coming back to life, about slowing down and reconnecting with oneself and with our environment. So I think this will be a really beautiful piece to watch. So I'll end this here, Marcus, and hope we can continue the conversation. I'll just stop sharing my screen.
Yeah, unshare your screen.
There we go.
Thank you. Sounds great. I wanted to ask Deniz, first of all. Deniz, how do you go about choosing a curator for the Biennale? How did you end up with Mariana?
Good question. Every 2 years, we're selecting an advisory board of different design professionals, some curators, academicians, or designers, and from different regions. And then we have a conversation. The first thing we do is having a conversation what the next biennial could bring and what would make a difference and what practices are interesting. And then we come up with a long list of names, and then we discuss them. Like, it takes ages actually. And then finally we come up with, let's say, 3 names shortlisted, and then we go on, have interviews with them. And yeah, last year, maybe around this time even, we've been talking to Mariana, and there she told us glimpses about empathy already, and we were kind of convinced that she would bring a new flavor to the biennial and show new practices from different regions, and also engage in a different way with our local designers and help us create a new experience for the audiences. Basically, that's how it works.
And what is the objective of the Biennale from the organization's point of view? What do you hope to achieve from it?
I mean, as I said in the beginning, and it's a culture institution, and for us, obviously, it's important to create accessibility to our audiences to topics that they're not familiar with, and in experiencing. I mean, especially in the frame of design, experiencing daily life or understanding daily life through the lens of the design or through the lens of the design biennial. So that's why we're not really showing, let's say, final products or the newest technology or the newest latest designs. I mean, there are much better events or other events that are doing it in a different way. But for us, it's important to also bring the process on the table, to bring the different layers of design in the exhibition, which is more like an experience platform where you can discover new ideas and maybe things that you would never discover as design, actually, as a regular audience. But at the same time, we have an obligation to the design professionals, obviously. So the conversation we are having on that level is a completely different one. While the exhibition tries to explain maybe or let experience and ask questions to the audiences at the same time in a simple way, we have a very much let's say sophisticated and complicated conversation with all the designers and the professionals, the industry, also re-questioning constantly with them what actually the practice of design is and how it is converting and what will we do in the future. And I think last edition, Jan Bolden said it very well. What is going to be our attitude? I mean, it was all about design, pedagogies, and education, but I think in general now, it makes also a lot more sense to project it to other forms of methods in life. We need to understand what the future is, or how we will react and what our attitude will be. And I'm just hoping that our audiences take a little bit of our ideas and also use them in their daily lives.
And I'm going to ask this question to Mariana as well later, but has diversity always been important to the Biennale? Because you've had female curators, you have a female curator this year, and I noticed 2 years ago that there was an extraordinary number of women represented in the Biennale, and people from not the usual suspects of Western countries. Mm-hmm. Is that deliberate? And if so, you seem to be somewhat ahead of the game in a profession that has sort of grappled with diversity for quite a long time and not done an awful lot about it.
Marcus, is this for me? The question?
Sorry, it's for Deniz, but I wanted to ask you the same thing as well, of how you are going to tackle diversity with your design. But Deniz, to you start first of all, is it have you deliberately encouraged diversity in the people you involve in the Biennale?
Yeah, in one way, yes. In one way, no. I mean, it came also naturally. You have to know that the institution, the Istanbul Foundation for Culture and Arts, is predominantly directed or led by women. I mean, we have a very good ratio on diversity in our institution. So it came actually naturally. But also, if you look into different practices, it comes naturally. If you're not stuck in one region, if you're not stuck in one profession, if you have the opportunity to look cross-disciplinary and also beyond the design profession, then you find really interesting people from different parts of the world, different communities, and yes, a lot of women as well.
And Mariana, how do you tackle that same issue?
Yeah, I was thinking about your question. I suppose it's interesting you see that in the program. Of course, I do believe it's important to have a diversity of perspectives, especially around the subject that is contemporary design. But I think that our selection has been guided mostly by the nature of the studios and the kinds of research that they were doing. But what could be is that, you know, the theme we're tackling perhaps is a theme that does not appeal so much to sort of mainstream design. It could be something like that, and therefore our list of participants is maybe less the usual suspects, and therefore sort of provides I suppose new designers and new people. But I think that we have a focus. For us, it's been very important, you know, the idea that we're working in Istanbul, and that's why we established this young curators group. It's very important for us to have a link, and especially in this moment in time when we cannot be there as much as we would like to, you know, myself and Billy and Sumitra. And so it's great to have this group of collaborators that are, you know, on site. And then for this program of research projects, we have decided deliberately to work with the region of the Mediterranean basin. And this is because we were interested in land and soil as a territory of research and design practice. And of course, the Mediterranean is really literally that, right? The sea in between land, and it has been the birth of many civilizations, but also a space where a lot of contemporary conflicts have unfolded. And also a space, you know, in relation to Europe, for example, where a lot of, say, agricultural policies have produced very specific results. So we think it's interesting, and that has motivated us. I mean, last year when there was the IPCC report on land, which revealed that food is really perhaps our most straightforward way to tackle the climate crisis, and so it seemed important to us to deal with land and with water in their relation to food, and therefore then it created this pool of practitioners.
And Deniz said that when they interviewed you last year for the role of curator, you were already talking about this theme of empathy. So how do you come up with the theme for a biennale? Was that something that you already had in your mind, that you were looking for an opportunity to do somewhere, or was it conceived specifically for the context of Istanbul?
Yeah, interesting. It was something that developed organically, I should say. We, you know, at the time when I spoke with Deniz, I was in the Azores, and together with the decorators, we were developing this program, which was, we called it at the time Expedition Empathy. And we were doing a project in the Azores, which are an archipelago in the Atlantic Ocean that sits between 3 tectonic plates. And we were very conscious that we were somewhat foreigners, like when the islands were first populated by humans in the 14th century, you know, we were again sort of occupying the island, and the Azores had been subject to many, many expeditions. Darwin famously went to the Azores, and all of those expeditions had a very rational, classifying attitude towards the landscape and the peoples in the island. So there's many books that came out of those expeditions, and we thought we wanted to go in with a group of practitioners, artists, designers, and we thought we wanted to have to develop an expedition where bodily knowledge would be as valued as scientific knowledge, almost, where we were interested in exploring not just these rational, quantifiable dimensions of nature, but also those that cannot be measured exactly and cannot be really accounted for in rational systems. So it began there, but then that was very intuitive. And then when I started speaking with Deniz and the team in Istanbul, I began reading a lot more about it. And then, of course, with the formation of the curatorial team, it just expanded a lot more. And now it's so different from what it was back then, but that's how it started, yeah.
And how much did you have to change the program to fit the circumstances that we find ourselves in? Did you have to throw away a lot of ideas and a lot of contributors, or did you manage to keep them all on board?
Right. Yeah, there was a lot of there were a lot of transformations. So the biggest change was at the beginning we had the idea of doing some projects that were interventions and participatory by nature and involving a lot of encounters and gatherings between people. And that proved to be a little bit risky during this the pandemic. And also we've decided that we wouldn't do exhibitions, let's say, in a conventional sense, right? And so we went ahead with a plan that allowed for the biennial to be visited by the local population in case, you know, there's no travel, and to provide a program that is of interest to the city, the context of the city, but also that provides for a global spectatorship. So that's why we created the critical cooking show program, for example. But we thought, of course, it was challenging at the beginning, but then again, there's so much to be thought and discussed about the biennial model as one where so lots of people travel to one same place at the same time, as a model where there's huge number of pieces being transported across continents. And so we went ahead with a plan that actually feels a lot better to us, because it's mostly to great extent locally produced, and it's developed for Istanbul to a great extent. So we're quite happy with it at the moment.
And Deniz, do you think that the nature of biennales or biennials, I'm sorry, I was saying the name wrong at the beginning, it's the Istanbul Design Biennial. Do you think they will change forever because of the pandemic? And or do you think we'll go back to all flying all around the world in a couple of years' time like crazy?
It's a good question. I think that's a question that every single biennial tries to answer now. I'm sure that there will be less flying around, but for some of the formats that are already existing, if you think of Venice, it requires that many people go there with all the presentations of the countries, and the big conversation that you're having there for more than 100 years now is very important. I still believe, or we all, also my colleagues and friends, when we discuss, we still feel the urgency and the necessity to create something physical where people can meet, come together, encounter, and not only in a local context, but also in a cross, how should I say it, a cross-disciplinary and a wide context and a global context that is still in a present need. But now we have more ways to do it, I think. So we're thinking there was always a digital representation in arts and culture, and also especially this design world created so many opportunities actually, and platforms, amazing platforms that now we're discovering newly again. So we're just shifting some of the meetings, let's say, or the moments in the digital world, but still thinking of the physical. Less traveling for sure, but I think in a minute when it feels like, okay, now it's a normal situation, now we can travel again, there will be going around, but in a more conscious way, not only flying, maybe using a bike, maybe using a train will be more popular than just jumping into a plane and going on a trip for half an hour with the plane. So more consciously done everything. But yeah, we all will, not only biennials, every single event form or method will be changing. Big museums are rethinking if you think of all the big concert halls and theaters, the amazing places you have in London, they are now in the moment to think, should we really just leave one row open and just every two seats, one person? Doesn't make any sense. All the extended world, or the extended work that's been done behind the scenes also now is rethought. I think there's no answer right now, but we will experience together and live this experiments all together until we get to a moment where we feel more comfortable in the methods and formats we're presenting.
So for this year, though, you're assuming that nobody will come from overseas and it's all for the local audience, or you're leaving it open that there will be international visitors and press and things like that?
Yeah, we're leaving it open, I think. We're leaving it open. Also myself, I have a hard time to just stay in Istanbul. I feel the urge to go somewhere, but yeah, it's within our borders right now, but the mind is around the world. So we leave it open. We'll see how it will evolve.
And Mariana, final question for you. How do you find all these amazing contributors? I mean, I thought that at Dezeen we knew what was going on everywhere in the design world, but the the images you were showing, I've not seen those things before. Do you have a secret network, or a lot of time on Google, or how do you find the people and select the people for a project like this?
Yeah, I have an amazing team of curators, of course, working, we are working together, and I suppose these practices are practices with which we were in one way or another in dialogue with, of course, with a few exceptions. They are also, the work of people we admired, and we wanted them to be part of the biennial. There's also the open call that we had an open call for the kitchen, and so many projects that we've selected through the open call then made it to the biennial, not exactly for the purpose of the open call, but then as the program evolved, our conversations also evolved over time. I'm pleased to know that you don't recognize many of those names, so that'll be a nice surprise when you see the work. That's really good.
A lot of them, yeah. Well, congratulations, and congratulations on making the decision to go ahead. I hope it pays off for you. Hope I can be there, but otherwise we can do another talk like this, and you can give me a little virtual tour or something like that. So great to see you again, Mariana and Deniz, and best wishes with the biennial.
Thanks so much, and great to see you, and really cross fingers to meet in Istanbul.
Yeah, sure. Marcus, we hope to see you there. Yeah, sooner or later, within the next 6 months. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marcus. Bye.
Bye.